Ukraine just launched its biggest strike against Russian oil yet. A staggering fleet of over 300 drones has just hit Russia's largest oil depot, along with some key infrastructure sites. And Russian President Vladimir Putin is furious. No matter what he does, he can't seem to stop Ukraine from attacking his country's energy infrastructure. In today's video, we'll explain how the strike happened and how Ukraine has been ramping up its drone attacks ever since Putin said he wouldn't agree to a ceasefire. We'll also answer the key question: what do these strikes mean for Russia and Ukraine? On March 16th, Euromaidan Press reported that Ukraine had launched one of its most impressive drone strikes of the war. An enormous fleet of 337 drones took to the skies, penetrating deep into Russian territory and lighting up the skies over Moscow. When all was said and done, Ukraine had successfully halted operations at the Druzhba pipeline, which accounts for around 50% of Moscow's entire fuel supply. Here's how it all went down. It began when Ukraine managed to distort a significant number of Russia's air defenses in Crimea. The territory, which Putin annexed in 2014, has been a key battleground in the Ukraine war. Russia had hoped to use its foothold in Crimea to launch naval attacks against South Ukraine via the Black Sea. It also hoped it would secure the Black Sea early into Putin's invasion, allowing for troop and equipment transports via the waterway. That didn't happen. Instead, Ukraine intelligently targeted Russia's so-called Black Sea fleet with drone and missile strikes. Those strikes took out a third of the fleet, with Russia being unable to replenish it due to Turkey not allowing any military ships through the two straits that lead into the Black Sea. That was bad enough for Putin. What Russia's leader didn't expect is that Ukraine would expand its assaults into Crimea itself, setting the stage for its massive drone strike. Those anti-air defense strikes have been ongoing since at least June 2024, which is when the Strategic Command of Ukraine's armed forces reported that it had destroyed 15 of Russia's S-300, S-350 and S-400 air defense systems in Crimea since May of that year. The loss of the S-400s in Crimea was a massive blow to Russia. Each unit cost $600 million to build, with Russia touting the S-400 as the most advanced air defense system in the world. It clearly isn't as advanced as Putin would like you to believe. Several stations in Crimea have been destroyed, with Ukraine also reporting that it had taken out 10 control points and 15 radar stations in Crimea back in June. There have likely been more attacks on Crimea's aerial defenses since. So what does any of this have to do with Ukraine's March 16 drone strike? Euromaidan reports that those Crimea attacks have been accompanied by other strikes deep into the rear of Russia's defenses. Ukraine has also threatened to strike the Kerch Strait Bridge again, which offers a direct land-based route into its territory. These strikes and threats have forced Russia to relocate the few air defenses it had left in Crimea to cover these weak spots. Putin thought he had Ukraine covered. What he didn't know is that he was playing directly into Ukraine's plans. Shifting through his air defenses created several weak spots in the Russian front line, leaving several key Russian targets vulnerable. Vulnerable to hordes of Ukrainian drones, to be precise, which they sent into the skies over Russia on March 16, giving Putin his most restless night since the Ukraine war began. Reports emerging from Russia suggest that Ukraine's 337 drones struck multiple targets in several Russian oblasts, including Kirsk, Oryol, Lipetsk, Ryazan and Bryansk. The gaps in Russia's defenses are so massive that Ukraine was even able to target several oil refineries in the Moscow region, which leads us to the headline attack: the strike on the Druzhba pipeline. The International Association of Oil Transporters, or IAOT, says that the Druzhba pipeline is one of the world's largest oil networks. It stretches for over 3,400 miles, with the pipeline beginning in the Almytskyiv region of Russia. In that region, several pipelines carrying crude oil from the Caspian Sea, the Urals and Siberia meet, with the Druzhba pipeline then being used to transport that crude oil to several key locations. Moscow is one of those locations. A refinery near Russia's capital turns the crude oil flowing through the Druzhba pipeline into usable oil products, such as petroleum and diesel. However, the pipeline also flows out of Russia. It enters Mozyr in Belarus before splitting into northern and southern branches. The southern branch continues through Ukraine and into Slovakia, the Czech Republic and Hungary. Remember that last country. It's important when we dig into the reasons Ukraine carried out this strike. As for the northern pipeline, it goes into Poland and Germany via Belarus. All told, the Druzhba pipeline transports up to 1.4 million barrels of oil per day, with the IAOT claiming it has the potential to increase to 2 million barrels when at full capacity. The pipeline also accounts for around 50% of Moscow's domestic diesel and gasoline production. And Ukraine just took a huge portion of that pipeline out of the equation. It all started with a drone attack at the Ryazan military airfield. Explosions close to that airfield placed Russia's airports on high alert, according to Euromaidan. That was all part of Ukraine's plan. This initial Ryazan strike was designed to trick Putin's forces into thinking that they would only have to deal with attacks targeting airports. They were wrong, as Russia's Air Force pushed all of its rapid responses capabilities to Ryazan and other military airfields. Ukraine zoned in on its real target, the Druzhba pipeline. A horde of drones struck, taking out a key control station that halted all of Russia's oil exports to Central Europe, including Hungary. The control station was an intelligent target. An oil pipeline control station is a complex assembly of valves, instrumentation, and fittings that work in concert to ensure that oil flowing through a pipe goes where it needs to go. Think about them as hubs for pipelines. Without control stations, Russia can't direct the flow of its oil. It also can't monitor and regulate that flow, which raises the possibility of pressure problems occurring inside its oil pipelines. When Ukraine targeted the Druzhba pipeline control station, it removed Moscow's ability to control the volume of oil flowing through the pipeline. Ukraine also prevented Russia from maintaining the required pressure levels in its pipeline and removed Russia's ability to isolate sections of the pipeline that might need to be repaired or maintained. In short, Ukraine made the Druzhba pipeline less efficient and supremely unsafe, with an obvious result. Russia had to shut the pipeline down. Worst of all for Putin, the Druzhba pipeline strike was one of only a series of aerial assaults Ukraine has launched into Russian territory over the last week. On March 14th, Ukraine sent what essentially amounted to a warning shot for its massive 337 drone-strong strike that came a couple of days later. This attack targeted the Tuapse oil refinery in Krasnodar Krai, taking out a gasoline storage tank. The region's local governor, Veniamin Krondatiev, was surprisingly forthcoming with the details. The area of the fire is more than 1,000 square meters, or approximately 10,700 square feet, and emergency services are working, said Kondratiev in a Telegram post. As usual, Russia's media reported that the fire was caused by drone debris rather than a direct strike by a drone. This is a common tactic by Russia's propagandists. Rather than admitting that Ukrainian drones penetrated the country's aerial defenses, they tried to frame attacks as though Russia successfully shot the drone down. It's not the drone that did the damage, Russia tries to claim. We were so good at destroying it that a small drone somehow created massive amounts of debris that magically caused massive fires. Those claims never add up. The Kiev Independent reports that Ukraine hasn't commented on or taken responsibility for the strike. However, it clearly targeted the refinery. The UK's Metro newspaper offers more details, claiming that the attack triggered 10 explosions at the Tuapse refinery oil refinery, leading to a massive inferno that was just 55 miles away from a $1.29 billion palace Putin has overlooking the Black Sea. That location also tells us that Ukraine's strikes against Crimea's air defenses worked once again. Tuapse was made possible by the gaps Ukraine intelligently created in Russia's air defenses. And there's more. 3 days before the Tuapse strike, Ukraine launched another massive 300-plus drone attack, this time primarily targeting Moscow. Russia claims to have tracked and destroyed 91 drones over the Moscow region, though that again seems spurious. Russian officials say that the massive drone attack shut down 4 of Moscow's major airports, with the drones also causing 3 deaths and 18 injuries. This particular attack happened as delegates from Ukraine were meeting with a US envoy in Saudi Arabia to discuss the terms of a potential ceasefire deal with Russia. The message was clear from Ukraine. We may be discussing peace, but that doesn't mean we've forgotten that we're at war. CBC suggests that the drone assault on Moscow may have been a response to a massive strike launched on Kiev that included 126 drones and a ballistic missile earlier on March 11. Ukraine also shows no signs of slowing down. On March 17th, the day after the attack on the Druzhba pipeline, Ukraine was at it again. Euromaidan press reports that months of gathering intelligence, conducting sabotage, and manufacturing more powerful drones paid off for Ukraine, allowing it to conduct an attack on the Ufa oil refinery. Again, the attack was made possible by Ukraine's intelligent attacks against Russia's air defense systems. Ukraine also took advantage of having operatives within Russia, the outlet claims, who conducted a series of sabotage operations that crippled an S-400 installation in Yevpatoria, which essentially blinded the few missile launchers Putin had stationed in Crimea. The gaps this sabotage created allowed Ukraine to first target an oil refinery in Novokuibushuk, Samara, which is responsible for processing 8 million tons of oil a year. However, the highlight of this attack was the Ufa oil refinery. Located a massive 869 miles from Ukraine, the Ufa refinery is a key fuel supplier for the Russian army and is responsible for producing over 168,000 barrels of oil per day. Just like the Druzhba pipeline, that refinery is now up in flames. That makes 2 major drone strikes in 2 days for Ukraine. On March 16, it launched its largest drone attack yet, with 337 unmanned aerial vehicles devastating a key Russian oil pipeline. A day later, it launched perhaps its most precise strike. Success against Ufa also represents the deepest attack on Russian territory Ukraine has conducted so far during its war with Russia. Both are impressive for different reasons, but let's hone back in on the Druzhba strike so we can ask a key question. What does this massive drone attack mean for the Ukraine war? There are a few things Ukraine achieved here, with one of the most important being creating pressure on Vladimir Putin. We mentioned earlier that Ukraine met with the US to discuss the terms of a ceasefire arrangement on March 11. That ceasefire was conditional on Putin's acceptance and would see the Ukraine war essentially come to an end for 30 days. That means no more ground warfare, naval attacks or airstrikes by either side. As part of the ceasefire, the US also agreed to resume sending military aid and intelligence to Ukraine, both of which had been suspended in the wake of US President Donald Trump's chaotic meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the White House on February 28. Ukraine didn't get it all its own way with the agreement. The US provided no security guarantees as part of the ceasefire, and it also insisted on resuming negotiations on a key rare earth minerals deal with Ukraine. But those weren't issues for Zelensky. The most important thing for Ukraine's president was that he righted the relationship ship between Ukraine and the US, along with placing the ball squarely in Russia's court when it came to peace. It was a brilliant diplomatic move on Zelensky's part. The prospect of peace, even a temporary ceasefire, placed immense pressure on Putin. Russia's president responded by essentially rejecting the ceasefire. He claimed that there were still questions to be answered, even though he said the idea of a ceasefire was correct. We agree with the proposals to cease hostilities, claimed Putin. But there are issues that we need to discuss, and I think that we need to talk about it with our American colleagues and partners and perhaps have a call with President Trump and discuss it with him. Putin was attempting to wrest the power away from Zelensky now that the ball was in his court. On March 16th, The Guardian reported that it's also likely that Putin and Trump will discuss terms at some point during the week. Which brings us back to Ukraine's Druzhba pipeline strike. It was a reminder from Zelensky, not just to Putin, but to the Russian people. It's Ukraine reminding Putin that there's a ceasefire agreement on the table. If Putin doesn't take it, Ukraine's strikes against Russia's key energy infrastructure could both continue and grow more intense. Putin can't afford that. The Druzhba pipeline is critical to Russia's domestic energy needs, meaning Ukraine has just damaged a pipeline that's required by Moscow citizens. They'll be forced to deal with having less fuel for their cars and hampered oil supplies for their heating, all of which creates internal pressure for Putin. His people will grow angry, especially when they're feeling the pain caused by Ukraine's strikes while knowing that their president is dragging his feet in a proposed ceasefire. While the Druzhba pipeline strike alone is unlikely to pressure Putin into agreeing to a ceasefire, there are other issues that the strike creates. We mentioned earlier that you should remember the fact that Hungary is one of the key recipients of oil via the Druzhba pipeline. The nation also happens to be the only member of the European Union, or EU, and NATO that appears to support Putin ahead of Zelensky. Hungary has repeatedly attempted to stifle the EU's attempts to send aid to Ukraine. The country's Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, even chose to leave the room in December 2023 when EU delegates began talking about the possibility of Ukraine becoming a member of the collective. Make no mistake, Hungary has close ties to Russia, so close in fact that the country chose to keep Druzhba as its main pipeline for unrefined oil back in October 2024. Supplies had halted temporarily a few months prior when harsher sanctions were placed on the Russian energy company Lukoil. However, Hungary received an exemption from those sanctions, alongside Slovakia and the Czech Republic, because it had no other alternatives. The EU urged Hungary to diversify its resources. It hasn't, and it won't, at least when it comes to oil. Now, Hungary has lost access to a pipeline that was responsible for constant oil deliveries amounting to 3.9 million metric tons. Euromaidan reports that Hungary gets the majority of its oil from the Druzhba pipeline, along with 40% of its gas. With the pipeline shut down, it'll be forced, albeit temporarily, to source much more expensive oil and gas from countries like Norway and the United States. That's bad news for Hungary. So bad that the country's foreign minister, Peter Szijjártó, has gone so far as to claim that the Ukraine's pipeline strike is an attack on Hungary's sovereignty. Not only is Ukraine's massive attack causing major problems for one of Putin's staunchest European allies, it's also creating more issues for Russia itself. Losing Druzhba means Russia is forced to loosen its stranglehold on Hungary's energy sector. That provides an opportunity for other supplies to gain a foothold. It also creates the potential for Hungary to focus more intently on nuclear power, especially if it deems its oil supplies from Russia to be shaky. How loyal to Russia will Orbán be if Ukraine follows up its Druzhba strikes with more attacks that affect Hungary's energy supplies? Only time will tell, but it's a nice secondary win for Ukraine that has caused some tension between Hungary and Russia. Finally, there are the economic aspects of the Druzhba strike to consider. Ukraine's attack shut down a pipeline that's responsible for transporting up to 1.4 million barrels of crude oil daily. As of March 11, a single barrel of crude sold for $67.6. Some quick math tells us that means every day that the Druzhba pipeline is down costs Russia over $94.6 million. Repair work is underway at the pipeline, but it hasn't been completed yet. And the odds are it'll take several days to complete, especially given that Ukraine struck one of the pipeline's control stations. Russia can't afford to rush repairs on such vital components. Doing so would place the entire pipeline at risk. So it'll have to take its time. If the Druzhba pipeline is down for an entire week, which is a possibility, Ukraine may have just cost Russia over $662 million. Worse yet for Putin, he'll know that Ukraine could target the pipeline again. It'll have multiple control stations, several of which are now vulnerable thanks to Ukraine's intelligent manipulation of Russia's air defenses. More diversionary strikes will open up new gaps, meaning we may be seeing just the start of a series of strikes targeting Russia's oil industry. The net result will be less cash flowing into Russia, which only adds to the pressure Putin is already feeling after he refused to immediately agree to the ceasefire. Throw new tensions between Russia and Hungary into the mix, and Ukraine's 337 drone strike has created far more problems for Putin than he'd ever imagined he'd faced at home. And Ukraine is going to keep on hitting Russian oil. It proved that with its March 17 attacks on the Novokuyboshchsk and Ufa refineries. The pressure will keep mounting on Putin as Ukraine now has a low-cost way to cause potentially billions of dollars of damage to a Russian economy that's already ailing under a 21% base interest rate and annual inflation that ticked up to over 10.1% over the previous year in February 2025. How will Putin respond to Ukraine's massive drone strike? Let us know what you think in the comments, along with sharing your thoughts about the impact the Druzhba pipeline attack will have on the Ukraine war. Will the strike push Putin closer to agreeing on a ceasefire? What will happen if Ukraine succeeds in cutting Hungary off from its main energy supplier? Tell us what you think, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for all of the latest news about the Ukraine war. We strive to give you accurate, up-to-date information about military action around the world, and we greatly appreciate your support.